Hi. Can you tell us your first name, your nationality, the year you arrived, and how old you were?
Okay, so I'm Ruby. I am from Mexico. I arrived to the States when I was 7. That was in 1999.
Okay, our first question is, whenever you first arrived to the U.S., what communication challenges did you face?
Well, first of all, the language, of course. When I came to the States, I didn't speak any English at all. So I feel like it wasn't as hard for me as a 7-year-old to get by because there were my parents, and then when I was in school, like I was immediately put like in ESL classes, started learning the language, and I remember, I learned English pretty quickly. But for sure it was the language, and I could see it in my parents as well, like them struggling to, go when they went to the stores or the restaurants, and for sure it was the language barrier, the English, Spanish.
So when you were in school, were you involved in English as a second language program?
Yeah, when I arrived, they immediately put you in ESL. So especially, I don't know if they do it now. They do it in all the grades, I believe. But in second grade, like as soon as I went in there, they set me up with another student, to help translate in the classroom. Her name was Angelica, and she was my personal translator. And then, at the same time, I was taken to ESL classes every day and to learn English, and also I would come back to the classroom. I think it was like an hour or two every day. I don't remember.
What impact did that have on you?
Um,
As in, did it make you feel any different from all other children?
I don't think that did necessarily. I mean, I think as a 7-year-old, I wasn't thinking that. As a 7-year-old, I was just kind of trying to understand what the teacher was saying, and I really liked going to the ESL classes, because in Mexico, when they taught us any English, it was like in English grammar books, they would teach you like table, door, things like that. So in ESL classes, I really enjoyed that. You got to learn more in-depth stuff, so it didn't really make me feel bad or different from other students. And I think also it had to do with the fact that in my classroom, or in my school, in my town, there's a lot of Hispanics. So it wasn't just me being taken out, it was a lot of other students being taken out to ESL classes.
Okay, so as you grow older, how did you learn to identify yourself? Do you identify yourself as a Latino, Latina?
When people ask me, I definitely say, yeah, I'm Mexican. Or when they ask me, where are you from? Mexico. Or what you identify with, I'm Mexican, a Latina. But I do remember when I first arrived, I remember thinking and being aware that I was different from everybody else. And I remember I definitely did not like to tell people that I was from Mexico, because there seemed to be a negative stigma about Mexicans in the U.S. It had to do with different factors, such as when I arrived, there weren't a lot of people that would rent to Hispanics, to Mexicans especially. So it was like nobody wanted to admit they were Mexican. So I felt, even when I was 7, when I was young, I did not want to admit that I was Mexican. But as I grew older and became more aware of the situation, now I'm very proud to say I'm Mexican,
So how does that culture compare to that of your parents?
How does that what?
Culture compared to that of your parents?
What do you mean?
Like, do you feel like your definition of being Mexican is a different definition as your parents being Mexican?
Do I feel like my definition of
being a Mexican is different than from your parents?
Are you asking like knowing like English, or how does?
Because I know I was talking to somebody and they were telling me that their definition of being Mexican is because of the way they perceive it, and they've read books while their parents have actually lived in Mexico, but they have their created Mexican.
Yeah. I think it's different. I don't think it's like radically different, simply because at home we maintain the Mexican culture, Mexican traditions, and everything, food, practices, whatever. But it is different because, like you're saying, in school we study this, and it's also influenced by the people you hang out with in school. So whereas my parents hang out with a lot of other relatives who are Mexican, and they've lived in Mexico most of their lives, I've only lived there for 7 years. And after that, I'm just Mexican through my parents and through our relatives, but I can't say that, and I see this when I talk to my family in Mexico, like my cousins my age, while their mentality and their way of being is really different from mine. Even though we share the same practices, same traditions, it's a different mentality simply because I grew up here and they grew up there. So I think it's a different perception.
Do you consider yourself to be assimilated?
Yeah. Yeah and no. I think that yes, because you kind of have to in order, like, and it's a sad thing, you know, you kind of have to assimilate in certain ways in order to to keep going. Because there's certain aspects of the Mexican culture that would just hinder you here in the U.S. So like I've had to assimilate in certain ways, like, you know, my education, the way I see like my religion and things like that. But at the same time, I've never wanted to let go of my Mexican culture. I think that's such an important part of me that I would never say like, oh, I'm American, even though I grew up here. So when people ask me like, oh, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from Mexico. And they're like, oh, you know, so you're an international student. I'm like, no, I live in North Carolina. They're like, oh, so you're American. I'm like, no. You know, no, still, the Mexican culture is still a very important part of me. It's how I identify.
So about your social life, do you fit in with your peer group?
It depends what peer groups we're talking about.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So peer groups, for example, at school, there's different peer groups. There's the peer groups that you choose, which are your friends, and then there's peer groups that you have to work with. For example, I see a very clear distinction between my friends who I've chosen, and you know, some of them are Latino, some of them are Asian, Black, other ethnic minorities, some of them are white, yes. But for example, in the business school, the overwhelming majority is Anglo. And in that peer group, I mean, obviously I work with them and, you know, I get to be friends with them, but I can't relate with them as much because they come from a completely different background. And whereas a lot of these people's parents, they have a very strong business background because, you know, they're born in America and everything, their parents are CEOs and all these things. I come from a different place, so like I don't feel like I fit in with that peer group as much. You know, I try to, you know, we get along, but I don't feel like I can completely fit in.
Okay. Well, this concludes our interview, and thank you very much for your time.
Okay. Thank you.